Good evening. As you settle into this moment, let yourself find a comfortable place to rest. Your body knows how to release the day. Your breath knows how to find its own rhythm. There's nothing you need to do right now, except be here, exactly as you are. Tonight we'll journey together through tales of simplicity and contentment. Stories from ancient mountains and quiet valleys. Wisdom passed down through generations of monks and sages who discovered that the most profound truths often wear the plainest clothes. That happiness isn't found in what we add to our lives, but in what we learn to appreciate in this very moment. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Let your breath slow down. Feel the weight of your body supported completely. The earth holds you. The darkness welcomes you. And these stories, like old friends, will walk beside you into sleep. Take one deep breath in. Let it go completely. And we begin. In the mountains of southern China, there lived a monk named Shitu, whose name meant stone head. He earned this name not from stubbornness, but from the flat rock where he built his small hermitage. The rock jutted out from the mountainside like a natural platform, just large enough for a simple hut made of bamboo and thatch. Nothing more. Shitu had studied at the great monasteries. He knew the sutras by heart. He could debate philosophy with the finest scholars. But one spring morning, after years of temple life, he simply walked into the mountains with a cloth bag containing one robe, one bowl, and nothing else. The rock became his home. He gathered pine needles for his bed. He drew water from a stream that sang over smooth stones. In the morning, he would sit on the edge of the rock and watch mist rise from the valley below. The world emerged slowly. First the nearby pines, then the distant ridges, then the sky opening like a flower. Other monks heard of Shitu living on his rock. They came to visit, expecting to find profound teachings or special practices. Instead, they found him sweeping pine needles, or sitting quietly, or preparing simple rice. Master, one visiting monk asked, "What is the secret of your practice?" Shitu smiled and gestured to the rock beneath his feet. "I sit here," he said simply. "But surely there must be something more. Some special teaching." Shitu picked up his broom. "When I sweep, I sweep. When I sit, I sit. When I eat, I eat." The visiting monk frowned, disappointed. He had traveled far for this. "But anyone can do that." "Yes," Shitu said gently. "Anyone can. But how many do?" Years passed. Shitu's hut weathered and settled into the rock as if it had always been there. Moss grew on the north side. Birds nested in the eaves. The hermitage became part of the mountain itself. Students began to gather, not in a formal monastery, but simply drawn to the peace they felt near the rock. They built their own small huts nearby. They learned to carry water, to gather firewood, to sit with their own minds. One day, a wealthy merchant arrived. He had sponsored the building of 3 temples. He came with gifts of silk robes and fine incense. "Master Shitu," he said, "I wish to build you a proper monastery. with a meditation hall and dormitories, with a library for sutras. She too thanked him for his kindness. "But I have everything I need right here." The merchant looked around at the simple hut, at the worn straw mat, at the single bowl and cup. "Surely you could use more comfort, more space, more resources to teach." She too invited the merchant to sit. They looked out at the valley together. "Tell me," she too asked, "when you go to sleep at night, how many beds do you need?" "One, of course." "And when you eat a meal, how many bowls can you use at once?" "Just one." "And when you walk, you can only walk on one path at a time?" "Yes." The merchant nodded slowly. "Then why," she too asked gently, "would I need more than what serves each moment?" The merchant sat in silence. Something shifted in his chest. He had been building temples, thinking they would bring him peace. But peace sat right here on this rock. Not in the having of things, but in the freedom from needing them. Before he left, the merchant asked one more question. "Master, don't you ever wish for something more?" She too smiled. "Every morning I wake to bird song. I have water to drink and rice to eat. I have this rock to sit on and this sky to look at. When I truly see what I have, wanting falls away like autumn leaves." The merchant walked back down the mountain, but something had changed. He looked at his merchant caravans differently, at his full storehouses, at his many possessions, and he began to wonder what he actually needed, what actually brought him contentment. She too lived on that rock for 40 years. He never sought students. He never wrote a single word. He just swept his pine needles and sat on his rock and lived as simply as water flowing downhill. When he died, his students didn't build a grand monument. They left the rock as it was, a place where the wind still blows, where mist still rises each morning, where anyone can come and remember that contentment isn't found in what we acquire. It lives in how fully we inhabit this one moment, this one breath, this one simple life. This story reminds us that happiness doesn't require accumulation. In our modern lives, we're constantly told we need more to be content. More money, more possessions, more achievements, more followers, more everything. We scroll through feeds showing other people's highlight reels and feel our own lives lacking. We upgrade our phones, even though the old ones work fine. We fill our homes and storage units, and then rent more storage. All the while carrying this vague feeling that once we get that next thing, then we'll finally be satisfied. But Shitu shows us something different, something revolutionary in its ordinariness. He shows us that contentment isn't at the end of a shopping list. It's not waiting in some future moment of achievement. It's available right now, in this very moment. When we learn to fully receive what's already here, think about your own life. How often do you stop to appreciate what you already have? The simple miracle of a warm bed, clean water flowing from a tap, the ability to see color and hear music. These gifts surround us constantly, but we barely notice them because we're so focused on what we don't have yet. We're so busy climbing toward more that we don't notice we're already standing on solid ground. What if, like Shitu. We asked ourselves each day, what do I actually need in this moment? Not what do I want or what does society say I should have. But what does this moment actually require? Usually, it's far less than we imagine. Usually, it's already here. Shitu lived with one bowl. Most of us have cabinets full of dishes we rarely use. But he wasn't deprived. He wasn't suffering. In fact, he was free in a way that most of us can barely imagine. Free from maintenance. Free from worry about possessions. Free from the burden of managing and protecting and organizing more than he needed. His one bowl served him perfectly because he was fully present to each meal. Consider how this applies today. We might not live on a rock with one bowl, but we can bring the same quality of attention to our lives. We can notice when we're acquiring things out of habit or boredom, or the belief that more will fill some inner emptiness. We can pause before buying and ask if this truly serves our life or just clutters it. We can experiment with using less and noticing if we actually feel deprived or if we feel, unexpectedly, lighter. This isn't about forcing ourselves to give up everything we enjoy. It's about discovering what genuinely nourishes us versus what we accumulate out of unconscious habit. It's about distinguishing between the possessions that serve our lives and the possessions we end up serving, cleaning them, storing them, insuring them, worrying about them. Shitu's contentment came from presence, not from poverty. He wasn't simply living with less. He was fully alive to what he had. Each morning's birdsong was a fresh miracle. Each bowl of rice received with gratitude, each breath of mountain air a gift. When we learn to receive life this way, when we're truly present to the abundance already surrounding us, wanting naturally quiets down, not because we force it to, but because we realize we already have enough. We already are enough. Right here, right now, just as we are. Let that settle in. Breathe gently. And we continue. In a village near Kyoto lived a potter named Takeshi. His shop sat on a corner where two dirt roads met. Inside, shelves held his work. Rice bowls, teacups, vata vessels, simple forms in earth tones, brown, grey, the warm orange of clay, kissed by flame. Takeshi had learned his craft from his father, who learned from his father before that. 3 generations working the same clay, using the same wheel, firing in the same kiln built from river stones. Every morning before dawn, Takeshi walked to the riverbank. He dug clay from a particular spot his grandfather had shown him. The clay there was smooth and strong. It held water without weeping. It bore heat without cracking. He carried the clay home in a wooden bucket, wedged it to remove air bubbles, slapped it onto his wheel. Then, as the sun rose, he would begin to spin. His hands knew exactly how much pressure, exactly when to push in or pull up. The clay rose between his palms like a prayer. He threw simple forms, no fancy glaces, no elaborate decorations, just honest vessels made to be used, made to hold rice for a family's dinner, to cradle tea during a quiet afternoon, to carry water from the well. One day, a merchant from the capital visited the village. He was traveling to buy goods for wealthy households in Kyoto. He stepped into Takeshi's shop and looked around with sharp, appraising eyes. "You make fine bowls," the merchant said. "Clean forms. Good glaze." Takeshi bowed his thanks. "I could sell these in the capital. To tea masters. To noble families. You could double your prices. Maybe triple them." Takeshi continued arranging bowls on his shelf. "These bowls are for the people of this village. They know what they cost. It's a fair price." The merchant frowned. "But you could become known. Famous even. I know tea masters who would pay 10 times what you charge for work like this. Then they would have to drink from something else." Takeshi said gently, "These bowls belong here." The merchant tried to understand. "Don't you want more? A bigger workshop? Apprentices? Recognition?" Takeshi paused his work. He looked around his small shop. At the wheel his grandfather's hands had worn smooth. At the shelves his father had built. At the window that caught perfect morning light. "I have everything I need," he said. "Clay from the river. A wheel that spins true. A kiln that fires hot. Neighbors who use my bowls to feed their families. What more could matter?" The merchant shook his head and left. He couldn't understand a craftsman who didn't want to expand, who didn't want fame or fortune, who seemed content with enough. Years passed. Takeshi continued his work. Up before dawn. Clay from the river. Hands on the wheel. Simple bowls that held the food that kept the village fed. His children grew up in the shop. They learned to wedge clay, to throw basic forms, to fire the kiln at just the right temperature. They learned that honest work, done with care, is its own reward, that a well-made bowl serving a family's dinner is worth more than a decorative piece sitting unused on a wealthy person's shelf. One autumn, a typhoon hit the region. Fierce winds tore roofs from houses. Rain flooded fields. The village struggled. Food became scarce. Takeshi dug more clay, threw more bowls. Simple vessels the village could afford, even in hard times. He fired the kiln at night to save fuel. He worked by candlelight to save daylight for others. The village survived that winter, partly because of those bowls. Because when resources are scarce, simple tools that work matter more than ornate objects that merely impress. A bowl that holds rice feeds a child. A cup that holds water sustains life. Purpose trumps decoration every time. Decades later, long after Takeshi had passed away, a famous tea master was traveling through the region. He stopped in the village and noticed an old bowl being used for serving rice. The form was perfect, the glaze luminous, the rim worn smooth from thousands of meals. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "Old Takeshi made it," the villager said. "His son still runs the shop. His bowls fed half the village for 40 years. The tea master wanted to buy it, to put it in his collection, to display it for other collectors to admire. But the family said no. This bowl fed my grandmother, my parents, me, my children, It still serves dinner every night. Why would we put it on a shelf? The tea master finally understood. Takeshi had been a master all along. Not because he became famous. Not because he made precious objects for wealthy collectors, but because he made honest vessels that served their purpose completely. Because he found contentment, not in recognition but in work, well done, in tools that served their community, in a life lived with integrity and care. That's true wealth. Not what we accumulate or achieve or display, but what we give, what we serve, how fully we inhabit our purpose, however ordinary it might seem. In our culture, we measure success by expansion. Bigger revenues, more locations, greater reach, broader influence. We're taught that if we're not growing, we're dying. That staying the same size is failure. But Takeshi's story offers a different possibility. What if staying small isn't failure but wisdom? What if knowing you're enough is actually sophisticated awareness, not lack of ambition? What if contentment with your proper size is a sign of maturity, not inadequacy? Consider your own life and work. How much of your stress comes from trying to be bigger than you need to be? From comparing your small operation to someone else's empire? From feeling that because you could expand, you should expand? We live in a culture that pathologizes contentment, that treats satisfaction as laziness, that insists we should always want more, achieve more, become more. But what if you're already the right size? What if your work already serves exactly who it's meant to serve? What if the pressure to scale up is just external noise that has nothing to do with your actual purpose? Takeshi knew his enough. He made bowls for his village. That was complete in itself. He didn't need to make bowls for the entire province or the whole country or export them around the world. His work had appropriate boundaries. It matched his capacity and served his community. That was sufficient. That was beautiful. That was enough. Many of us carry guilt about our enough. We feel we should be more successful, more productive, more visible, more influential. We look at people with bigger platforms or larger businesses and feel diminished. But we're comparing our humble village pottery to someone else's capital city enterprise. Différents styles servent différents purposes. Neither is better. They're just different. What would it feel like to define your own enough? To look at your life and say, this is the right size for me. This serves my purpose. This matches my capacity. This nourishes rather than depletes me. Not because you couldn't do more, but because more wouldn't actually serve your deeper intention. More would just mean more complexity, more management, more distance from the actual work you love. Takeshi had his hands in clay every day. He knew each bowl intimately. He served his neighbors directly. If he had scaled up, hired apprentices, managed multiple locations, chased the capital city market, he would have become a businessman instead of a craftsman. He would have gained reach but lost touch, grown in visibility but shrunk in meaning. There's profound freedom in knowing you're enough, in refusing the cultural pressure to always want more, in defining success not by how much you accumulate or how far you expand, but by how well you serve your purpose, by the integrity of your work, by the contentment you feel at day's end, by the lives your labor serves. Maybe you don't need a bigger house. Maybe the one you have shelters you perfectly. Maybe you don't need a more prestigious job. Maybe the one you have allows you to do work you care about without sacrificing your sanity. Maybe you don't need more income. Maybe you need less expense and more satisfaction with what you already earn. This is countercultural thinking. It goes against every advertisement, every social media highlight reel, every cultural message insisting that more is better and enough is never enough. But Takeshi shows us another way, a way of craftsmanship over careerism, of purpose over prestige, of contentment with enough over the endless, exhausting treadmill of more. What is your enough? What is the right scale for your life? Not what should it be according to someone else's measure, but what feels true for you, what allows you to do your work with integrity, what lets you serve without becoming depleted, what permits contentment instead of demanding constant striving. Rest with that question. Let yourself simply be, and our journey continues. In the forests of northern Japan, there lived a woman named Eiko. She was neither young nor old, neither wealthy nor poor. She lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of a village. One room, a sleeping platform, a small hearth, a window facing east. Eiko had once lived in the city. She had a good position in a merchant's office. She kept the books, tracked inventory, managed correspondence with trading partners in distant provinces. Her work was competent and her position secure. But every night she returned to a small apartment in a crowded neighborhood. The walls were thin. She could hear her neighbors' conversations, their arguments, their crying children, the sounds of other people's lives pressing in from all sides. She owned many things. The nice things you're supposed to own. Good clothes for work. Dishes for entertaining. Books she intended to read. Objects that reflected good taste and appropriate status. But something felt hollow. She would sit among her possessions and feel strangely empty. One spring, she took her annual leave to visit a relative in the countryside. On the journey, her carriage passed through a village surrounded by cedar forests. She glimpsed a small house at the forest's edge, smoke rising from its chimney, laundry hanging on a line, a simple garden. Something in her chest opened, a longing she couldn't name, a pull towards something she'd forgotten was possible. She inquired at the village. The house was empty. An old woman had lived there but passed away the previous winter. Her children had moved to the city. They would sell the house for a modest sum. Eiko stood at a crossroads of her own making. She could return to her position, to her salary and status, to her apartment full of nice things, or she could step into something unknown, something that made no practical sense. She bought the house. Her city friends thought she'd lost her mind. Gave up a good position for what? To live alone in the forest, to take up what kind of work, to pursue what future? But Eiko felt certain in a way she'd never felt about her city life. This small house, with its single room and eastern window, felt more like home than any place she'd ever lived. She brought almost nothing with her. One trunk of essential belongings. What she needed fit into a space she could carry herself. The first few weeks were strange. The silence of the forest was louder than the noise of the city. She could hear birds she'd never noticed before. Wind moving through cedar boughs. Her own breath in the quiet house. She learned the forest's rhythms. Morning light filtered through trees at a particular angle. Afternoon brought dappled shade to her garden. Evening settled like a soft blanket. Stars appeared, more than she'd ever seen in the city's lit streets. She grew vegetables in a small plot. Nothing fancy. Radishes and greens. Beans climbing bamboo poles. Herbs for tea and cooking. The soil taught her patience. Seeds grew in their own time. Forcing accomplished nothing. She took work mending clothes for the village. She was skilled with a needle. Her stitches were small, and even people brought their worn garments, and she made them whole again. The work paid enough for rice and oil, and the few other things she needed. Her days had a simple rhythm. Wake with dawn light. Prepare tea. Work in the garden. Mend clothes in the afternoon when the light was best. Prepare dinner. Sit and watch evening come. Sleep when darkness fell. She owned so little now, but she felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with possessions. Rich in time, in silence, in the freedom to live at her own pace. Rich in the intimacy she developed with this small plot of earth, with the birds who visited her garden, with the changing seasons that her former busy life had barely allowed her to notice. People from the village would visit sometimes. They would look around her single room, at her few possessions, at her simple life. Some pitied her. Some were curious. A few understood. One woman asked, "Don't you get lonely?" Aiko considered this. "I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. The forest is full of company, and I finally have company with myself. In the city, surrounded by people, I was lonely all the time. Here, I'm rarely alone. Just Kia." There's a difference. Years passed in this simple rhythm. Aiko's face grew lined from sun and wind. Her hands grew strong from garden work. Her heart grew peaceful in a way she'd never known was possible. When she was very old, a young woman from the village came to visit. She was considering leaving for the city, seeking opportunity, a bigger life. Aiko invited her to sit. They watched evening light move across the floor. "Tell me," Aiko said, "what are you seeking?" The young woman spoke of ambitions, of things she wanted to achieve and acquire, of the larger life waiting beyond the village. Aiko nodded. "I wanted those things too once. And perhaps you should seek them. Perhaps you need to fill your hands before you learn what it feels like to empty them." She paused, then continued, "But I'll tell you what I learned. The bigger life was already here, right in front of me. I just couldn't see it because I was looking past it towards something else. Toward more. Toward different. I had to go away to realize that the life I was seeking was available all along. It just required me to arrive fully, to be here completely. to stop chasing and start receiving. The young woman left eventually. She did go to the city. She did seek that larger life. Perhaps she found it. Perhaps she needed to. But Aiko remained. In her single room with her eastern window, living simply, living completely, living with a richness that had nothing to do with accumulation and everything to do with presence, with arriving fully in each moment, with discovering that the abundant life doesn't require more. It requires us to become fully alive to what's already here. She died peacefully one winter evening. The village found her in her sleeping space. No suffering, just sleep that didn't wake. As simple as her life had been, they found almost no possessions to distribute. A few clothes, her needle and thread, her tea kettle, but they found something else. A deep peace pervading that small house, a sense that someone had lived there completely, had found what they were seeking and rested in it fully. That peace remained long after. The house stood as a reminder that a big life isn't measured in square footage or possessions or achievements. That contentment isn't found in the accumulation of more, but in the full inhabitation of enough. That simplicity isn't deprivation. It's freedom. Freedom to be present. Freedom to receive. Freedom to live. Aiko's story speaks to something many of us feel but struggle to name. This vague dissatisfaction that persists no matter what we acquire or achieve. We check all the boxes society tells us to check. Good job, nice home, full life. Yet something feels off, hollow, like we're living someone else's script instead of our own truth. We're surrounded by things but starved for meaning, busy but not purposeful, connected digitally but lonely in our souls. We keep thinking the next achievement or acquisition will fill the emptiness, but it never does. Because the emptiness isn't from lacking something external. It's from lacking presence, from being so focused on the next thing that we're never fully here for this thing. Aiko had the courage to step out of a life that looked good on paper but felt empty in practice. That takes tremendous bravery. We're taught that once you achieve a certain level of success, leaving it is failure. That simplifying is regression. That wanting less means you're giving up or dropping out or somehow not trying hard enough. But what if wanting less is actually profound wisdom? What if simplifying isn't about deprivation, but about getting clear on what actually nourishes you versus what you've been conditioned to want? What if the abundant life requires subtraction, not addition? Think about your own life. How much of what you own do you actually use and love? How much is just stuff that accumulated over time? Things you felt you should have, or bought on impulse, or received as gifts you didn't want? How much of your time is spent maintaining a lifestyle that doesn't actually feed your soul? How much energy goes into keeping up appearances, meeting expectations, living up to an image of success that isn't even yours? Aiko reduced her possessions to what fit in one trunk. Most of us would panic at the thought. We'd make lists of all the things we absolutely couldn't live without. But if you actually tried it, you'd discover that most of what you think you need, you don't. You'd find that possessions require attention. They need to be maintained, organized, stored, cleaned, protected, insured. They cost not just money but time and energy and mental space. Every object in your home is making a tiny claim on your consciousness. Multiply that by hundreds or thousands of objects, and you're carrying an enormous, invisible burden. When you reduce your possessions to what you actually use and love, something miraculous happens. Suddenly, you have space. Physical space, yes, but more importantly, mental and emotional space. Space to breathe, to think, to feel, to be present to your actual life instead of constantly managing your stuff. Aiko also reduced her ambitions. She stopped climbing any ladder. She released the pressure to become more successful, more wealthy, more recognized. She accepted her enough. That alone might be the most radical act in our culture of endless self-improvement and perpetual optimization. We're taught that accepting where we are is giving up. That satisfaction is complacency. That if we're not constantly striving for more, we're stagnant. But this is exhausting, and it prevents us from ever arriving, from ever feeling that we've made it, that we're okay just as we are, that this moment, this life, this version of ourselves is complete and sufficient. What if you're already successful enough, already accomplished enough, already enough? Period. Not because you couldn't grow or learn or change, but because your value isn't determined by your achievements. Your worth isn't measured by your productivity. You're inherently enough simply by existing, by being the particular expression of life that you are. Aiko found richness in time, in silence, in the rhythm of natural cycles. She became intimate with her small plot of earth, with the seasons, with her own inner landscape. This kind of richness doesn't show up on a resume or a bank statement. You can't photograph it for social media, but it's the richness that actually sustains us. That fills the hollow place no amount of external success can reach. Many of us are starved for this kind of intimacy, with nature, with ourselves, with the present moment. We're so busy, so distracted, so caught up in doing and achieving and acquiring that we've lost touch with being, with presence, with the simple joy of existing without agenda, of sitting and watching light move across the floor, of listening to birds, of growing something with our hands, of living in rhythm with something larger than our personal ambition. This isn't about everyone needing to move to a cabin in the woods. Most of us have responsibilities that require we stay where we are. But we can bring Aiko's spirit into our lives, wherever we are. We can simplify, we can reduce, we can get clear on what we actually need versus what we've been conditioned to want. We can create space. We can choose presence over productivity. We can value being over becoming. We can ask ourselves, what is my essential life? What do I actually need to feel nourished and whole? If I stripped away everything that doesn't serve that, what would remain? And would that be enough? Not in some deprived, ascetic way, but genuinely, satisfyingly enough. Aiko discovered that enough was far simpler than she'd imagined. One room, a garden, meaningful work, quiet, presence. That was her abundant life. Your enough might look different, but the principle remains. Contentment comes not from adding more, but from arriving fully in what we already have. From being here completely, from living true to our actual needs rather than our conditioned wants. Let yourself rest in that possibility. Breathe easy. We have more stories ahead. In the mountains of Korea lived an old monk named Baek. His monastery sat on a terraced slope. Stone buildings with curved tile roofs. Prayer flags snapping in the wind. A courtyard where monks walked in slow meditation circles. Baek had been there for 50 years. He had arrived as a young novice with nothing. He would leave the same way. The monastery followed a strict schedule. Wake at 3 in the morning. Chanting at 4. Meditation until 6. Then breakfast. Work. Study. More meditation. Dinner. Evening chanting. Sleep. Every day the same. Year after year. Decade after decade. Baek's days were simple beyond measure. He had no possessions except his robes and his sleeping mat and his single bowl. He shared a small room with 3 other monks. He owned no books, no pictures, no mementos. His work was in the monastery kitchen. For 50 years, he prepared meals. He washed vegetables. He measured rice. He ladled soup into bowls. He scrubbed pots with river sand. He kept the kitchen fire burning. The work never changed. Wake up, wash vegetables, prepare breakfast, clean, prepare lunch, serve, clean, prepare dinner, serve, clean. Day after day, season after season, year after year, the same simple tasks performed with the same careful attention. Visitors to the monastery would sometimes speak with Baek. They would ask about his practice, about his realizations, about what he had learned in 50 years of monastic life. He would smile and say, "I learned to wash vegetables very well." They would wait for more, for some profound teaching, some deep insight. But that was it. That was what 50 years had taught him. How to wash vegetables well, how to prepare rice so each grain was tender but not mushy, how to season soup so it nourished body and spirit, how to keep a fire burning steady. Simple things, humble things, things anyone could do, things everyone must do. But Baek had discovered something in those simple tasks. He had discovered that washing vegetables completely, with full attention, was no different from meditation. That stirring soup with care was a form of prayer. That scrubbing pots until they shone was polishing his own mind. Nothing was beneath him, because nothing was separate from practice. Chopping onions was training. Sweeping the floor was cultivation. Carrying water was carrying the Dharma. One winter, a famous Zen master visited the monastery. He came with an entourage of students. He gave profound talks about emptiness and Buddha nature. He led special meditation sessions. Everyone flocked to hear him. Baek remained in the kitchen. Vegetables still needed washing. Rice still needed cooking. The fire still needed tending. The famous master came to the kitchen one morning. He watched Beek working, watched how he rinsed each vegetable under cold water, how he examined each grain of rice, how he attended to the fire with complete focus. "How long have you been here?" the master asked. 50 years, Beek replied, not looking up from his work. "And what have you learned?" Beek held up a radish. "I learned that this radish will become part of someone's body, that this carrot will give energy to someone's day, that this soup will warm someone who is cold. So I treat these vegetables like they matter, because they do." The famous master stood silently. He recognized something. This old monk washing vegetables understood what he himself taught, but Beek understood it in his hands, in his daily work, not as philosophy, but as practice, as life. "Teach me," the master said. Beek smiled. He handed the master an apron. "You can help me wash vegetables." They worked together in silence. The famous master and the kitchen monk, washing vegetables. Nothing special, nothing profound. Just this simple work, this present moment, these ordinary tasks that keep a community fed. After an hour, the master removed his apron. He bowed deeply to Beek. "You are the real teacher here," he said. Beek laughed. "I'm just a cook. But yes, vegetables are excellent teachers if you pay attention." Years later, when Beek was very old and dying, the monks gathered around him. They wanted some final teaching, some last words of wisdom. Beek smiled at them, his eyes still bright. "Everything I know, I learned washing vegetables," he said. "Pay attention. Be thorough. Don't rush. Treat everything like it matters. That's all. That's everything." He died peacefully. No fanfare. No elaborate rituals. Just a simple monk who had lived a simple life, doing simple work with complete attention. They found his room empty after he died. Just his robe and his mat. Nothing else. He had arrived with nothing. He left with nothing. But he had lived with everything. He had lived fully, completely, present to each radish, each grain of rice. Moment. The monastery still maintains his kitchen. Monks still wash vegetables there. And sometimes, when the light hits the water just right, they swear they can feel old Beek's presence, not as a ghost, but as a reminder that the sacred isn't separate from the ordinary, that enlightenment is available in every simple task, that the profound life is this life, right here, right now, in these hands, washing these vegetables. Our culture worships the extraordinary. We celebrate the special, the unique, the exceptional. We're taught to reach for greatness, to aim high, to make our mark, to be remembered. But Beek spent 50 years washing vegetables, the most ordinary task imaginable, the kind of work we think of as merely necessary, something to get through so we can get to the real work. the important work, the work that matters. Yet Bake found everything he needed right there in that kitchen. He didn't need to achieve greatness. He didn't need to become famous, or write books, or lead meditation retreats. He needed to wash vegetables completely, to bring his full attention to whatever his hands were doing, to treat simple work as sacred work. This challenges everything we're taught about a meaningful life. We believe meaning comes from doing important things, from making a significant impact, from accomplishing something noteworthy. We measure our lives by achievements and accolades, by how far we've climbed above the ordinary. But what if meaning isn't found by transcending the ordinary? What if it's found by inhabiting the ordinary completely, by bringing such full presence to simple tasks that they become doorways into something deeper? What if washing dishes with complete attention is no less valuable than any profound meditation? What if the quality of our presence matters more than the importance of our activity? Think about your own relationship with ordinary tasks. How do you wash dishes while thinking about something else, while wishing you were doing something more interesting, while rushing through to get to the next thing? We treat ordinary tasks as obstacles between us and our real life. We perform them minimally, grudgingly, with resentment that we have to do them at all. But these tasks consume huge portions of our lives. Cooking, cleaning, commuting, shopping, laundry. If we're only half present for these activities, we're only half present for enormous chunks of our existence. We're essentially sleeping through most of our lives while waiting for the special moments to show up. Bake teaches us differently. He teaches us that there are no unimportant tasks, no throwaway moments, no merely necessary activities that don't count toward our real life. Every moment is your real life. Every task is an opportunity for presence. Every action can be performed as practice. When you wash vegetables, you're not just washing vegetables. You're training your mind to focus, to notice, to carry. You're practicing presence. You're cultivating attention. You're developing the ability to be here completely instead of scattered across past and future. This kind of practice doesn't look impressive from the outside. Nobody gives awards for washing vegetables well. It won't show up on your resume or your highlight reel, but it transforms your experience of being alive. It changes how you inhabit your moments. It determines whether you sleepwalk through your days or live them fully. Many of us are waiting for our lives to get interesting enough to pay attention to. We're waiting for the big moments, the special occasions, the major milestones. But life is mostly made of ordinary moments. Most days are regular days. Most meals are regular meals. Most tasks are regular tasks. If we can't find richness in the ordinary, we won't find it at all. Because the ordinary is what we have most of. Bake discovered that simple work done with care is its own reward. The act itself becomes satisfying when performed completely. Washing vegetables becomes meditation. Stirring soup becomes prayer. Tending a fire becomes cultivation. Not metaphorically, actually. When you bring full presence to anything, it becomes sacred. Not because the task changed, because you showed up for it completely. This is radically countercultural. We're taught that satisfaction comes from completing tasks, from checking things off lists, from getting through necessary work so we can finally relax. But Baig found satisfaction in the work itself, not in finishing it. In doing it, the process was the point, the activity was the practice, the task was the teacher. What if you approached your ordinary tasks this way? What if you washed dishes like you were polishing precious objects? What if you folded laundry like you were practicing origami? What if you drove to work like you were moving meditation, not to make them special, but to be present for them, to receive them fully, instead of resenting them? You might discover what Baig discovered, that there's profound contentment in simple work done well. That presence transforms everything, that you don't need extraordinary experiences to live an extraordinary life. You need to bring extraordinary attention to ordinary experiences, to show up completely for whatever this moment offers, to treat everything like it matters, because it does. It all does. Every vegetable, every breath, every moment. Let yourself sink deeper into rest. Your body knows how to do this. And we continue. In ancient China, there lived a farmer named Chen. He worked a small plot of land at the base of a mountain, 5 mu of rice paddies, a vegetable garden, 3 chickens, 1 water buffalo named Anu. Chen had inherited this land from his father, who inherited it from his father before. The family had worked this same soil for 7 generations. They knew every stone, every seasonal flood pattern, which corner stayed wet longest, where the sun hit first in spring. The farm was just large enough to feed Chen's family, his wife, his aging mother, his 3 children. They ate what they grew. They grew what they ate. Nothing extra. Nothing wasted. Chen rose before dawn every day. He led Anu to the paddies. Together, they worked the mud, preparing for planting or maintaining growing rice or harvesting what had ripened. The water buffalo pulled the plow. Chen guided it through the water. Their partnership was old and wordless. After working the paddies, Chen would tend the vegetable garden, bok choy, scallions, bittermelon, gailan, the vegetables his mother had taught him to grow, that her mother had taught her, seeds saved from last year's harvest, planted according to the lunar calendar. The chickens roamed free during the day. They scratched for insects in the garden, laid eggs in the morning. Chen collected them. 3 eggs most days, sometimes 4, occasionally only 2. His life had no drama, no great events, no exciting changes, just the steady rhythm of agricultural work. Plant, tend, harvest, rest, plant again. Neighbors would sometimes ask Chen if he wished for more land, a bigger farm, more animals, more prosperity. He would shake his head. This land feeds us well. Why do I need more? But what about your children? Shouldn't you expand so you have more to leave them? Chen considered this. I will leave them what my father left me. Knowledge of this land, how to work with it, how to read the weather, how to save seed, how to live within their means. That's worth more than extra land they don't need. One year, drought came to the region. Other farmers with larger holdings struggled. They had planted extensively, assuming rain would come as usual. When it didn't, their crops failed. Their debts mounted. Chen's small plot survived. He could hand water from the mountain stream. 5 mu was manageable. He could carry enough water. His family's needs were modest. They ate more simply that year. But they ate. The next year brought floods. Heavy rains swelled the river. Larger farms near the river valley were devastated. Fields washed away. Homes flooded. Chen's small plot, nestled at the mountain base, was spared the worst. Some flooding, yes, but manageable, fixable. His small scale meant he could respond quickly, could save what could be saved, could replant promptly when the water receded. He began to understand something. Small scale wasn't limitation. It was resilience. He could respond to conditions, could adjust quickly, could manage setbacks. Larger operations had efficiency and output, but they were brittle. A single bad season could devastate them. One mistake could be catastrophic. His small farm was flexible, responsive, human-scaled. He knew every plant personally, could spot problems early, could tend individual seedlings. His attention wasn't spread thin over vast acreage. It was concentrated on this particular plot of ground. Years passed in this rhythm. Chen grew older. His hair grayed. His back bent slightly from decades of bending to plant and weed and harvest. But his heart was content. He had worked land that fed his family. He had asked nothing of it that it couldn't sustainably give. He had passed each season fully present to its particular challenges and gifts. When the emperor's tax collector came through the region, he would note Chen's small holding. "You pay very little tax." He would observe, sometimes with suspicion, as if Chen was hiding wealth. "I have very little to tax." Chen would reply, "My farm produces what we need. Nothing more." Is that not enough? The collector couldn't argue with that. The law taxed surplus. Chen had no surplus. He had exactly enough. Year after year. Exactly enough. This became somewhat legendary in the region. The farmer who always had exactly enough. Never more. Never less. As if he had discovered some secret, some trick. But there was no trick. Just honest work. Just living within natural limits. Just knowing his enough and refusing to exceed it. Just tending what he had with care instead of grasping for more. When Chen was very old, his son took over the farm. By then, larger farms around them had adopted new methods, new seeds, new fertilizers. They boasted higher yields, greater output, more income. Chen's son felt pressure. "Father, shouldn't we modernize, increase production? Everyone else is." Old Chen walked to the edge of the paddies with his son. They looked at the rice growing there. healthy, green, sufficient. This land has fed 7 generations of our family. Chen said, "It fed us well. Not richly, but well. We never went hungry, never lived in debt, never pushed this soil beyond what it could give. That's why it still gives. Your neighbors who pursue higher yields, ask them again in 10 years. Ask if their soil is still fertile. Ask if they're still farming or if they've exhausted their land and moved on." The son understood. Small scale wasn't backwardness. It was wisdom. Enough wasn't poverty. It was prosperity, rightly understood. Contentment wasn't settling. It was arriving. He kept the farm small. He kept the rhythms his father had taught him. And the land continued to give exactly enough. Year after year, generation after generation, unmercifully by famines. Exactly enough. We live in an age of scale. Bigger is better. Growth is mandatory. If you're not expanding, you're failing. This message saturates our culture. Our economy depends on constant growth. Our sense of success requires ever-increasing output. But Chen's story offers a different model. What if enough is actually enough? What if small scale isn't a limitation to overcome, but a choice to embrace? What if sustainable living requires us to define our enough and resist the pressure to exceed it? Most of us don't farm, but we participate in the same dynamic. We're told we should want more income, even if we have enough. We're told we should upgrade our homes, even if our current homes serve us well. We're told we should advance in our careers, even if we're satisfied with our current position. There's always pressure to expand, to grow, to want more than we have. But what is this serving? Not our contentment, not our peace. Usually, it serves an economic system that requires perpetual growth, that treats satisfaction as stagnation, that pathologizes enough. Chen knew his enough. 5 mu of land, vegetables sufficient for his family, 3 chickens and a water buffalo. That was his prosperity. Not because he couldn't imagine more, but because more wouldn't actually improve his life. More would mean more work, more complexity, more management, more vulnerability to market fluctuations, more pressure to produce for sale rather than for use. He chose use value over exchange value. He chose sufficiency over surplus. He chose sustainable yield over maximum output. These choices allowed him to live without debt, to weather difficult years, to stay connected to his work instead of becoming a farm manager removed from actual labor. This model of small-scale resilience applies beyond farming. Consider your own life. Where are you trying to be bigger than you need to be? Where is the pressure to grow actually making you more fragile? Where might small scale serve you better than expansion? Maybe you're trying to build a side business into a full-time operation. But maybe the side business scale is actually perfect. It adds income and meaning without consuming your life. Scaling up might mean hiring, managing, dealing with complexity that removes you from the work you actually love. Maybe you're trying to grow your social media following, but maybe a small, engaged community serves you better than a large impersonal audience. Quality over quantity. Genuine connection over broad reach. Maybe you're trying to earn more money, but maybe your current income is sufficient if you reduced your expenses to match your actual needs rather than your conditioned wants. Maybe the time and energy required to earn more costs more than the money provides. Chen teaches us to consider the full cost of more. Yes, more land could yield more rice, but it also requires more labor, more water, more seed, more management, more risk, more stress. If the goal is flourishing, does more actually serve that goal, or does it complicate it? He also teaches us the resilience of enough. When you live at the scale, you can personally manage. You can respond to problems quickly. You maintain intimate knowledge of your operation. You can adjust. You're not locked into debt or overhead that requires you to maintain output regardless of conditions. Large operations are efficient but brittle. Small operations are less efficient but robust. They can flex. They can downscale during difficult times. They can upscale when conditions allow. They're responsive rather than rigid. Most importantly, Chen teaches us about sustainable relationship with our resources. He didn't extract more from his land than it could regenerate. He worked with its capacity rather than exploiting it. This allowed the land to continue giving generation after generation. We could apply this principle broadly. Don't extract more from your body than it can regenerate. Don't demand more from your relationships than they can sustain. Don't take more from your environment than it can restore. Don't push your work beyond your capacity to maintain quality. Sustainable flourishing requires respecting natural limits. This is not the message our culture sends. We're taught to push limits, to maximize, to optimize, to extract every possible unit of value. But this approach exhausts resources, burns out people, depletes soil, breaks relationships, crashes systems. Chen's way is different. Know your enough. Respect your limits. Work sustainably. Choose sufficiency over surplus. Value resilience over efficiency. Prioritize long-term viability over short-term output. Live at human scale and find contentment right there. In exactly enough. Year after year. Exactly enough. Breathe with that. Let it settle. We have more to discover together. On the coast of Vietnam, there was a fisherman named Min. He lived in a small house built on stilts over the water. The house had 3 rooms. One for sleeping, one for eating, one for his nets and equipment. Every morning before dawn, Min would take his small boat out to sea. The boat was old, wooden, painted blue and red with the protective eye symbol on its bow. It had belonged to his grandfather. His father had repaired it many times. Now Min maintained it with the same care. Min fished with simple nets. He knew the waters intimately, where fish gathered during new moons, where they moved when storms approached, where the underwater rocks created currents that concentrated schools of sardines and mackerel. He fished only for his needs. Some fish for his family, some to sell at the morning market. Enough to buy rice, vegetables, oil, the things they didn't produce themselves. By mid-morning, he was done. Boat pulled back to his stilt house. Fish cleaned and sorted. Some put in the wooden box with ice for market. Some taken to his wife for the day's meals. Then his day was his own. He would repair nets, maintain his boat, sometimes help neighbors with their repairs. Often he would simply sit on his porch and watch the water, watch the light change, watch birds diving for small fish, watch the rhythm of tides and weather. Other fishermen would sometimes tease him. "Min, why don't you fish longer? Stay out until noon. You could catch twice as much. Sell more. Earn more." Min would smile. "What would I do with more money? Buy a bigger boat, better nets, catch even more. But I already catch enough. More fish would just be more work. More to clean, more to sell. When would I sit on my porch? When would I watch the water?" They didn't understand. They saw opportunity, potential, the chance to expand, to grow their operations, to become more successful. But Min saw something different. He saw that he already had everything he needed. Food for his family, a roof over their heads, time to rest, time to notice the world, time to be present to his life instead of constantly working to maintain it. One year, a businessman from the city came to the village. He was looking to invest in fishing operations. He would provide capital for bigger boats, better equipment. In return, fishermen would sell their entire catch to him at set prices. Many fishermen signed his contracts. The promise of expansion was attractive. They bought bigger boats, stronger nets. They fished longer hours, ventured further out to sea, caught more fish. Min declined. "Thank you, but I'm content as I am." The businessman couldn't understand. "But you could make so much more money. Build a better house. Buy a motor for your boat. Secure your future." "My future is already secure," Min said. "I know these waters. I know my boat. I can always fish enough to eat. What more security do I need?" 2 years later, fish populations began to decline. Too much fishing. Too many boats taking too much. The waters couldn't replenish fast enough. The fishermen with larger operations suffered most. They had debt on their bigger boats, contracts requiring certain catch levels. They had to fish longer and go further just to meet their obligations. Some went bankrupt. Some had to sell their equipment. Min continued as before. His small-scale fishing had barely impacted the local fish populations. He still caught what he needed. The waters near his house still held fish because he had never over-harvested them. The businessman eventually left the village. The venture had failed. The waters were depleted. The market had collapsed. But Min still fished each morning in his grandfather's boat. Still caught enough for his family and a little to sell. Still sat on his porch watching the water. Still had time. Still had peace. still had exactly what he had always had. Enough. One afternoon, a young man from the city came to visit. He was stressed, burned out from his job, seeking some kind of answer. He had heard stories of the fisherman who seemed content. He found Min sitting on his porch, watching the light play on the water. The man sat down beside him. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, the young man spoke. "I work 60 hours a week at a company in the city. I make good money, but I'm exhausted, anxious. I can't remember the last time I just sat and watched the water." Min nodded. "Why do you work so many hours? To make money? To save for the future? To get ahead?" Get ahead of what? The young man paused. He'd never quite asked himself that. "I don't know." Ahead of struggle, I guess. Ahead of need. To be secure. Min gestured to his simple house. His old boat. "I have very little money. I work maybe 3 hours a day. Yet I feel secure. I have time. I have peace. I have enough." Perhaps security isn't about how much you have. Perhaps it's about knowing that what you have is enough. The young man sat with this. He looked at Min's life and felt something. Not pity, not superiority, but something like longing. This simple fisherman had something he didn't have. Something his 60-hour weeks couldn't earn. Something his salary couldn't buy. He had peace. He had time. He had presence. He had a life he was actually living instead of perpetually preparing for. The young man eventually returned to the city, to his job. But something had shifted. It began to question the hustle, question the constant striving, question whether he was climbing a ladder worth climbing. He didn't become a fisherman, but he did begin to ask himself, what is my enough? How much do I actually need? What am I sacrificing in pursuit of more? Is it worth it? These questions, once started, don't stop. They persist. They challenge. They invite us to examine our lives, to distinguish between what we actually need and what we've been taught to want, to consider whether our pursuit of security is actually creating anxiety, whether our quest for abundance is actually creating scarcity of time, presence, peace. Min never knew the impact of that afternoon conversation. He just lived his life, fished his waters, sat on his porch, watched the light change, and in his simple contentment, he offered a teaching more powerful than any sermon. He showed what enough looks like, what it feels like, how it might be possible to live. We're taught that security comes from accumulation. Save enough money, build enough wealth, then you'll be secure. Then you can relax. Then you can finally enjoy life. But Min challenges this. He shows us that security might not come from having more. It might come from needing less. From knowing you're enough so clearly that you're no longer vulnerable to market fluctuations or economic changes. You have your skills. You know your waters. You can always catch enough to eat. That's actual security. Most of us couldn't replicate Min's exact life, but we can replicate his principle. We can identify our enough. We can resist the pressure to constantly expand. We can choose to work less and live more. We can value time over money, presence over productivity, peace over profit. Our culture treats this as naive, as unrealistic, as privilege. Not everyone can choose to work less. The critique goes, and this is true. Many people work multiple jobs just to survive. They don't have the luxury of choosing enough. They're struggling to reach basic adequacy. But for those of us who have exceeded basic adequacy, who have choices about whether to pursue more, Min's example is relevant. We work extra hours, not because we must, but because we're chasing some vision of security that remains always just ahead. One more promotion, one more raise, one more zero in the account. Then we'll be secure enough to relax. But security isn't a destination. It's a state of mind. It's the feeling that you have what you need, that you can handle what comes, that you're not precariously dependent on circumstances beyond your control. Min had this security not because he accumulated much, but because his needs were modest and his skills were portable. He could fish. He knew the waters. That was enough. Many of us could shift our baseline, could reduce our needs to be more in line with our actual requirements rather than our conditioned wants, could develop skills that make us more resilient, could prioritize flexibility over accumulation, could choose lives that give us time and presence rather than just more money to fund lives. We're too busy to actually live. The question isn't whether we should all become fishermen. The question is, what is your enough? What do you actually need to feel secure, to feel content, to feel that your life is yours? And are you living at that scale, or are you pursuing some ever-receding vision of more that prevents you from ever arriving, from ever being here, from ever saying, this is enough. This is good. This is my life, and I'm actually living it. Rest with that question. Let yourself simply breathe. Our journey continue. In the ancient city of Chengdu lived a tea merchant named Wu. His shop was small, wedged between a fabric seller and a grain merchant on a bustling street. The shop had 2 rooms, the front room for customers, the back room for storage and for brewing samples. Wu specialized in one thing, oolong tea from the Wuyi Mountains. He didn't sell green tea or white tea or pu'er, just oolong, just from Wuyi, just 6 varieties that he knew intimately. Every year, Wu traveled to the mountains himself. He visited the same small farms he'd been buying from for 30 years. He knew the families, knew their trees, could taste the character of each farm's particular terroir in the finished leaf. He brought back only what he needed for the year, enough to keep his shop stocked, not more. Quality over quantity, intimate knowledge over extensive inventory. In his shop, he would brew tea for customers. He would take time with each person, explaining the character of each variety, the proper water temperature, the right brewing time, how to appreciate the changing flavor through multiple infusions. His customers were not numerous, but they were devoted. They understood that Wu wasn't just selling tea. He was sharing knowledge, cultivating appreciation, building relationship. Other tea merchants in Chengdu ran larger operations. They sold dozens of varieties. They advertised. They offered lower prices by buying in bulk. They had multiple locations. Wu's shop remained small. 1 room, 6 varieties, personal service. Sometimes fellow merchants would question his approach. Wu, you're leaving money on the table. You could expand, open other locations, sell more varieties, increase your profits. Wu would smile and offer them tea, but then I would be managing a business instead of serving tea. I would be hiring employees instead of talking with customers. I would be tracking inventory across locations instead of knowing each tea in my shop intimately. I would grow my business but lose my purpose. But don't you want to be successful? I am successful. I do work I love. I serve people who appreciate it. I make enough to live well. I have time to travel to the mountains each year. Time to study tea. Time to serve customers properly. What would more success give me? More money? Yes. But less of everything else that makes this work meaningful. 1 year, a businessman approached Wu with a proposal. He wanted to franchise Wu's model, to open shops across China, all following Wu's approach. Wu's name, Wu's reputation, but managed by others. Run at scale. The potential profit was enormous. Wu could become wealthy, famous. His tea approach could reach thousands of customers instead of the few hundred who visited his small shop. Wu considered the offer carefully. He sat with it for several days. He brewed tea and thought about it. Finally, he declined. He wrote a letter explaining his reasoning. My tea shop works because I am present in every interaction. I select every leaf. I brew every sample. I build every customer relationship. If I franchised this, I would quality control from a distance. I would train others to replicate my approach. But it wouldn't be my approach anymore. It would be a formula, a system, a brand. The soul would be gone. The businessman thought Wu was foolish. He was turning down a fortune, limiting himself unnecessarily. But Wu knew something. He knew that meaning doesn't scale. That presence requires your actual presence. That the intimate knowledge he had of his 6 teas came from decades of focused attention. That spreading himself across multiple locations would dilute everything that made his shop special. Years passed. Wu's shop remained as it had always been. Small, focused, personal. The other tea merchants who had expanded faced challenges: rising costs, employee turnover, competition from even larger operations. Some succeeded, some failed. All dealt with constant stress and pressure. Wu continued as before, traveling to Wu Yi each year, buying tea from his trusted farms, serving customers in his small shop, living simply, doing work he loved, feeling content. When he was old, his daughter asked if he had any regrets, if he wished he had expanded. built a larger enterprise, left her more wealth. Wu poured tea. They sat together in the quiet shop. Late afternoon, light filtered through the window. "I leave you something better than wealth," he said. "I leave you this model. How to do work you love at a scale you can manage. How to serve people well. How to know you're enough. How to find contentment in quality over quantity, in depth over breadth, in presence over profit. These lessons are worth more than money." His daughter understood. She kept the shop exactly as he had. Small, focused, personal. And she found, as he had, that this was enough. More than enough. Everything. We live in a world that worships scalability. Tech startups talk about scaling. Businesses talk about growth strategy. Everyone wants to expand, to reach more people, to have greater impact, to multiply their model. And sometimes this serves well. Some things should scale. Some innovations should reach as many people as possible. Some messages should spread widely. But Wu's story reminds us that not everything improves with scale. Some things are inherently personal. Some things depend on intimate knowledge and direct presence. Some things lose their soul when replicated. Think about what you do. Whether it's work, or art, or teaching, or care, is it something that scales well, or is it something whose value depends on your direct attention, your personal knowledge, your actual presence? Many of us feel pressure to scale, to reach more people, to have broader impact, to monetize and systematize and expand. We feel that staying small means we're not reaching our potential, that we're being timid, that we're settling. But what if small scale is exactly right for what you do? What if the intimacy possible at small scale is precisely what makes your work valuable? What if expanding would dilute the very quality that makes it special? Wu could have opened 10 shops, franchised his approach across China, become wealthy and famous. But his 10 shops would have served tea. His one shop served people. It built relationships. It educated palates. It created a space for appreciation and presence. That doesn't scale. That requires him, his attention, his care, his presence. Much of what matters in life doesn't scale. Love doesn't scale. Friendship doesn't scale. Deep teaching doesn't scale. Personal care doesn't scale. These things happen between people. They require presence, attention, time, the irreplaceable resource of your actual self showing up for actual encounters with actual people. When you try to scale these things, they transform into something else. Love becomes generic messaging. Friendship becomes networking. Teaching becomes content delivery. Care becomes protocol. The essence evaporates. The form remains, but the substance is gone. Wu understood this. He chose depth over breadth. He chose to know 6 teas completely, rather than stock, dozens superficially. He chose to serve a few hundred customers well, rather than thousands adequately. He chose meaning over money, presence over profit, soul over scale. This choice isn't for everyone. Some people are called to work that should scale, but many of us are called to work that only we can do. Work that depends on our particular skills, our accumulated knowledge, or direct attention. Work that loses something essential when delegated or systematized or franchised. If that's your work, Wu's example offers permission. Permission to stay small, to resist expansion, to say no to scaling opportunities, to choose the work you love over the wealth you could earn, to value the relationships you build over the reach you could achieve. Our culture will call this lack of ambition. We'll say you're playing small. We'll suggest you're afraid of success. But maybe you're not afraid of success. Maybe you've just defined success differently. Maybe your success is doing work you love at a scale you can manage. Serving people you can actually serve. Building relationships that are actually real. Having a life you're actually present for. Wu lived this way. He never became famous. Never became wealthy. Never expanded. But he did work he loved for his entire life. He served people well. He maintained relationships with tea farmers for decades. He educated hundreds of customers in the art of tea appreciation. He had time for contemplation, time for study, time for travel, time to actually live. That was his success. That was his enough. That was everything. What is your enough? What is the right scale for your work? Your life? Your impact? Not what should it be according to external measures, but what feels true for you? What allows you to do your work with integrity? What permits actual presence? What sustains meaning? Rest in that question. Let yourself be held by the silence. More stories await. High in the mountains of Tibet, there lived a hermit named Dorje. His cave was simple. Stone walls, earthen floor, a small fire pit, one window looking east toward distant peaks. Dorje had been a monk in a large monastery. He had studied texts, debated philosophy, performed elaborate rituals. He had been accomplished in his studies, respected by his teachers, but something called him away. Into silence, into solitude, into the direct experience of what all those texts described. He took almost nothing to his cave. One robe, one blanket, one bowl, prayer beads, nothing else. His days were simple beyond words. Wake with dawn light. Sit in meditation. Walk the narrow paths around his cave. Gather water from a spring. Prepare simple sampa. Sit in meditation again. Watch the light change on distant peaks. Sleep when darkness came. No schedule except what the sun dictated. No obligations except to his own practice. No distractions except weather and occasional visiting animals. The first months were difficult. His mind was so accustomed to constant stimulation, to texts and debates and rituals and company. In the silence, thoughts arose like storms. Memories, regrets, plans, fantasies. His mind spun relentlessly, but slowly, gradually, The spinning slowed. The silence grew deeper. The simplicity revealed itself as fullness rather than emptiness. He discovered that when external input stops, internal richness emerges. That silence contains everything. That simplicity is complete in itself. His meditation deepened, not because he was trying harder, but because there was nothing else. No distraction. No escape. Just this moment. This breath. This vast sky. These distant peaks. This simple cave. Occasionally, monks from the monastery would visit. They would bring supplies. Some paflur. Salt. Tea. A new blanket when his old one wore through. They would ask about his practice, about his realizations, about what he was discovering in his solitude. Dorje would smile. I'm discovering that I don't need much. That silence is nourishing. That simplicity clarifies everything. That presence is available when we remove what obscures it. But surely you miss the monastery, the teachings, the company. I don't miss anything. Everything essential is right here. The teachings are in the sky and the rocks and my own breath. The company is the birds and the wind and sometimes a mountain goat. And beneath all that, the presence that was always here, that was always available. I just couldn't hear it through all the noise. One winter was particularly harsh. Heavy snows closed the mountain paths. No one could visit for months. Dorje supplie dwindled. He ate less. The cold was fierce. His health declined. When spring finally came and monks reached his cave, they found him thin, weak, nearly out of food. Master, you must come back to the monastery. It's too dangerous here alone. Dorje shook his head. I'm not in danger. I have everything I need. But you nearly starved. I had enough. I ate less. Yes, but I didn't starve. I was fine. The difficulty taught me something, that I need far less than I imagined. That contentment isn't dependent on comfort. That peace remains regardless of circumstances. The monks couldn't understand. To them, his solitude looked like deprivation, like suffering, like unnecessary hardship. But Dorje had found something they hadn't yet discovered. He had found that stripping away everything extra reveals what's essential, that you don't know what you truly need until you live without what you don't need. That simplicity isn't poverty. It's clarity. Years passed in this way. Dorje lived in his cave. Through all seasons. Through easy times and difficult times. Through periods of deep peace and periods of mental struggle. Through everything. His practice matured, not because he accumulated knowledge or achieved special states, but because he showed up, day after day, year after year, present to this simple life, this basic existence, this human experience stripped of everything extra. When he was very old, a young monk came seeking teaching. He had heard stories of the hermit in the cave, the master who had given up everything. He found Dorje sitting outside his cave. watching evening light on the mountains. The old hermit's face was deeply lined, his body thin, but his eyes were clear, luminous, deeply peaceful. "Master, I've come to learn from you, to receive your teachings." Dorji smiled. "I have no teachings. I gave those away when I came here." "Then what do you have? This cave, this robe, this bowl, this moment, this breath. That's all. That's everything." The young monk was confused. "But surely you've realized something, understood something, achieved something in all these years." Dorje looked at the young monk with great compassion. "I've realized that I don't need to realize anything. I've understood that understanding is overrated. I've achieved nothing, and that's the greatest achievement. I've spent decades learning to be simple, to be here, to need nothing more than this. It's the hardest and easiest thing. It's everything and nothing. It's right here, always has been, always will be. You don't need to come to a cave to find it. You just need to stop looking past it towards something more." The young monk sat with this. The teaching was so simple it seemed like no teaching at all. Yet something in it rang true, something his complicated mind couldn't quite grasp, but his heart understood. He stayed with Dorje for several days. They sat together, walked together, prepared simple meals together. They did nothing special, nothing profound. Just these simple actions, these basic tasks, this present moment. When the young monk finally left, he was changed. Not because he had received profound teachings or achieved special insights, but because he had experienced simplicity, had felt how complete a simple life could be. How present moment awareness didn't require special circumstances. How contentment was available right here in basic existence. Dorje never wrote anything down, never taught students formally, never founded a lineage. He just lived simply in his cave. And in that simple living, he embodied a teaching more powerful than any text. That peace is our natural state when we stop complicating it. That contentment is always here when we stop looking for it elsewhere. That this moment, exactly as it is complete, is enough, is everything. Dorje's story touches something many of us sense but struggle to act on. The suspicion that much of what fills our lives is unnecessary, that beneath all the complexity and accumulation and distraction lies something simpler, something clearer, something true. We sense this, yet we can't quite access it. We're too embedded in our complicated lives, too identified with our possessions and achievements and relationships and obligations. The thought of stripping all that away terrifies us. Who would we be without all that defines us? Dorje discovered who. He discovered that beneath all the external identities and possessions lies basic human consciousness, awareness itself, presence, the capacity to simply be here, awake, alive, without needing anything in particular to validate that existence. This is radical in our culture. We define ourselves by what we do, what we own, what we've achieved, who we know. We build elaborate identities from external elements, and then we work constantly to maintain those identities, to prop them up, to protect them, to display them. But what if you're not your job, not your possessions, not your achievements, not your relationships? What if you're the awareness that experiences all those things? The presence that remains regardless of circumstances, the basic consciousness that persists whether you're wealthy or poor, accomplished or ordinary, surrounded by people or completely alone. Dorje found this. By removing everything extra, he discovered what remained. And what remained was enough, was complete, was, in fact, everything. Most of us won't become hermits. We have responsibilities, relationships, work that matters. But we can bring some of Dorje's principle into our lives. We can question what's truly necessary versus what's merely habitual. We can experiment with simplifying, with removing what doesn't serve, with creating space for presence and silence and basic being. What would happen if you removed one thing from your life that you think you need but actually don't? Maybe a subscription you don't use. Maybe a commitment you keep out of guilt. Maybe a possession that requires maintenance but doesn't bring joy. Maybe a belief about what you should do or be or have. Start small. Remove one thing. Notice what happens. Notice if you actually miss it, or if you feel lighter without it. Notice if the space created allows something to emerge. Some clarity, some peace, some presence that was always there but had no room to be felt. Dorje learned that contentment doesn't require comfort, that peace doesn't require perfect circumstances. That presence is available in hardship as much as in ease. This doesn't mean we should seek hardship, but it means we don't need to wait for perfect circumstances to find peace. We don't need everything to be just right before we can be content. Peace is available now. Contentment is possible here, not because circumstances are perfect, but because our relationship to circumstances can shift. We can learn to need less, to want less, to be content with basic existence, not through force or deprivation, but through discovering how complete simplicity actually is, how nourishing presence actually is, how sufficient this moment actually is. Dorje's teaching was his life. Simple, present, content with almost nothing. Not because he was deprived, because he discovered that when you have this moment fully, you have everything. When you're truly here, truly present, truly awake, what more could you need? The abundance isn't out there to be acquired. It's right here to be recognized. It always has been. It always will be. We just need to stop looking past it and receive it fully. Let that settle. Breathe with ease. Our stories continue to unfold. In a village in southern India lived a barber named Ravi. His shop was the size of a closet, literally. It had been a storage closet in the corner of a larger building. The owner let Ravi use it for a small monthly rent. The shop had room for one chair, one mirror, one small table for his scissors and razors and combs. Ravi stood in the space between the chair and the wall. That was it. The entire shop. Ravi cut hair and shaved beards. That's all he did. No fancy styles. No expensive treatments. Just clean haircuts and smooth shaves. Simple work done with care. He had 5 customers per day. 1 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 2 in the evening. 5 customers every day. That was his business. He charged very little. What people could afford. The price of a good haircut and shave. Fair. Simple. Those 5 customers per day earned him exactly what he needed. Rent for the shop. Rent for his room. Food. Simple clothes. Occasionally, savings for unexpected expenses. He worked perhaps 4 hours total. The rest of the day was his own. He would walk by the river, sit in the temple courtyard, read in his room, visit with friends. Other barbers in the village ran larger operations. They had bigger shops, more chairs, employees. They advertised. They offered additional services. Hair coloring, styling, treatments. They couldn't understand Ravi. You could expand, get a bigger space, hire an assistant, serve more customers, make more money. Ravi would smile while cutting their hair. But I have everything I need. Why work more? To get ahead, to build security, to have more opportunities. I am ahead. I have security. I have opportunities to walk by the river and sit in the temple and read books I love. Those are the opportunities I want. They thought he lacked ambition, that he was settling for less than he could be. But Ravi had clarity about something they didn't. He knew what he valued. And it wasn't more money or a bigger business or greater status. It was time, freedom, peace, the ability to live at his own pace, to do simple work well without the pressure of constant growth. His customers loved him, not because he was the most skilled barber in the village, but because when you sat in his chair, you had his complete attention. He wasn't rushed, wasn't distracted, wasn't thinking about his next appointment or his business strategy or his growth plans. He was present, focused on your haircut, on the conversation if you wanted to talk, on the silence if you preferred quiet. You felt cared for, attended to. That was worth more than any fancy technique or expensive product. Years passed. Ravi never expanded, never hired employees, never raised his prices beyond adjustments for inflation. He kept his 5 customers per day, his tiny shop, his simple life. Other barbers came and went. Some succeeded with larger operations. Some failed and closed. The village economy fluctuated, but Ravi continued unchanged. 5 customers per day. Simple haircuts and shaves. Work he could do well without stress. When he was old, someone asked him if he had any regrets, if he wished he had built something bigger, left more behind. Ravi was cutting the man's hair, his hands still steady despite his age, his attention still focused despite decades of the same work. "I leave behind thousands of good haircuts," he said. "Thousands of conversations, thousands of moments of care and attention given to people in my chair. I leave behind a model of simple work done well, of knowing you're enough, of building a life around what you value rather than what you're told to value. That's my legacy. It's not visible. It won't be remembered by history, but it mattered to the people who sat in my chair. That's enough for me." The man sat quietly. He was a successful businessman. He ran a large operation. He had achieved what he was supposed to achieve. He was wealthy and respected and influential. But sitting in Ravi's simple chair, feeling the barber's calm presence, hearing his contentment, he felt something like envy. He had everything Ravi didn't have, except the one thing that mattered most: peace, contentment, time, freedom. He left Ravi's shop that day with more than a haircut. He left with a question that would persist, that would grow, that would eventually change how he lived. What am I working for? What is all this effort serving? Am I building something that nourishes me, or just something that's supposed to impress others? Am I living my life or performing someone else's idea of success? These questions, once started, transform everything. They reveal what matters versus what merely seems like it should matter. They expose the difference between authentic values and inherited expectations. They create the possibility of choice, real choice, about how to live, what to build, what enough means. Ravi lived his answer to these questions. 5 customers per day. Simple work. Simple life. Deep contentment. That was his wealth. That was his success. That was everything. In our achievement-oriented culture, Ravi's approach seems almost incomprehensible. 5 customers per day. That's it? That's not a business. That's barely surviving. That's lack of ambition, lack of drive, lack of vision. But what if it's not lack? What if it's clarity? Ravi knew what he needed. And more importantly, he knew what he didn't need. He didn't need a bigger business. He needed time. He didn't need more income. He needed peace. He didn't need growth. He needed presence. This is sophisticated understanding, not naive simplicity. Ravi had clearly thought through what mattered to him. He had made conscious choices about how to structure his life and work. He wasn't just drifting. He was living intentionally, according to his own values, not society's scripts. How many of us can say the same? How many of us have consciously designed our lives around what we actually value versus what we've been told to value? How many of us work excessive hours, not because we need the income, but because we're on some treadmill we never consciously chose? How many of us pursue growth and achievement and accumulation, not because it nourishes us, but because it's what successful people are supposed to do? Ravi's 5 customers per day gave him something more valuable than a larger operation would have given him. They gave him freedom. Freedom from debt. Freedom from employees. Freedom from the pressure of maintaining a large operation. Freedom from constant stress. freedom to live at human pace, freedom to walk by rivers and sit in temples and read books and be present to his own life. This is real wealth. Not money in the bank, but sovereignty over your time, control over your days, the ability to live according to your own rhythm instead of being driven by external demands. Most people with far more money than Ravi had less freedom. They were locked into lifestyles requiring constant high income, committed to mortgages and car payments and private school tuition and maintaining appearances. They worked constantly to fund lives. They barely had time to live. Ravi worked 4 hours a day. The rest of his time was his own. To live, to be, to do what he chose. That's abundance. That's prosperity. That's success, rightly understood. And his work satisfied him. Not because cutting hair is inherently fascinating, but because he did it well, because he gave people his attention and care, because they left his chair feeling tended to. That provided meaning, purpose, satisfaction. Not the work itself, the quality of presence he brought to it. This is available to anyone. You don't need a special job, or a calling, or a passion. You need to bring presence and care to whatever you do. To do your work well, to attend to people, to be here completely instead of mentally elsewhere. That transforms any work into something meaningful. But you can't do that if you're overwhelmed, if you're stretched too thin, if you've expanded beyond your capacity to maintain quality, if you're constantly stressed and rushed and pressured. Then work becomes mere obligation, something to get through, something to endure. The possibility of meaning and presence evaporates. Ravi kept his work at a scale he could handle with ease. 5 customers per day, simple services, clean execution. That left energy for presence, for care, for actually being with each person in his chair. That's why his customers loved him. Not his skill, his presence. What is your right scale? Not what should it be according to external standards, but what allows you to show up with presence, with care, with attention. What allows you to do your work well without becoming depleted? What gives you time and space to actually live your life? These questions matter. They determine whether you're building a life or just maintaining an operation. Whether you're present or perpetually overwhelmed. Whether you're content or constantly chasing some vision of enough that remains forever out of reach. Ravi found his answers. 5 customers per day. Simple work, deep presence, rich life. That was his enough. That was everything. Rest in that possibility. Let yourself settle completely. More wisdom awaits. Near the banks of the Ganges River lived an old woman named Lakshmi. Her house was tiny. 1 room. Mud walls, thatched roof, earthen floor swept smooth. She owned almost nothing. 2 saris that she alternated. 1 cooking pot, 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 sleeping mat. That was everything. Lakshmi had not always been poor. She had been married, had children, had lived in a larger house with more possessions. But her husband died young. Her children moved to cities for work. The larger house was sold to pay debts. She was left with this tiny dwelling and almost nothing. But something remarkable happened. As her possession diminished, her peace increased. As her life simplified, her joy deepened. As she lost what she thought she needed, she discovered what she actually had. Each morning she woke with the sun. She walked to the river, bathed in the cool water, said her prayers, returned to her small house. She prepared simple food, chapati, lentils, vegetables from her tiny garden. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, grateful for the nourishment. Then she would work. She spun cotton thread on a wooden spindle her grandmother had given her. She sold the thread in the market for a few rupees, enough for her simple needs. Afternoons, she would sit outside her house, watching people pass, greeting neighbors. Sometimes visitors would stop to talk. She would offer water, conversation, presents. She had nothing material to give, but she gave something more valuable: time, attention, the sense that you mattered, that someone saw you, that you weren't alone. Neighbors began to notice something about Lakshmi. Despite her poverty, she seemed happy, deeply, genuinely happy, not pretending, not putting on a show, actually content. A younger woman named Priya began visiting her. Priya was married to a successful merchant. She had a large house, many possessions, servants, everything she was supposed to want. But she was miserable, anxious, never satisfied, always wanting more. Better furniture, nicer saris, more jewelry. Comparison and discontent consumed her. She couldn't understand Lakshmi. How are you happy with so little? I have so much, and I'm never content. Lakshmi smiled. Perhaps because you have so much. Each possession requires attention, care, protection. You spend your time managing things instead of living life. I have almost nothing, so I have time for everything else. For morning walks, for slow meals, for watching the river, for talking with neighbors, for being here. But aren't you worried about having so little, about your security? I was worried when I had more, worried about maintaining it, about losing it, about thieves and damage and debt. Now I have nothing worth stealing, nothing that can be taken that would devastate me. I'm more secure than I've ever been. Priya struggled to understand. In her world, security meant accumulation, meant having enough resources to handle any problem, meant building walls of wealth between yourself and potential hardship. But Lakshmi had a different security. She needed so little that almost any circumstance could provide it. She could adapt, could adjust, could live simply on very little. That made her resilient, flexible, genuinely secure in a way no amount of accumulated wealth could provide. Priya visited often. She would bring gifts, food, cloth, money. But Lakshmi would accept only what she truly needed, would redirect the rest to others who needed it more. "Don't you want to make your life more comfortable?" Priya would ask. "My life is comfortable. I have shelter, food, health, purpose, companionship, clean water, morning sun. What more do I need? A bigger house would just be more to clean. More possessions would just be more to manage. I have exactly what I need." More would be burden, not blessing. This was foreign to Priya. In her world, more was always better. Bigger houses, more rooms, more possessions, more of everything. The idea that more could be burden rather than blessing had never occurred to her. But she began to notice something. Her large house required constant maintenance. Her many possessions required constant organization. Her life of comfort required constant management. She was busy all the time, yet never felt she had enough time. Lakshmi, with her one room and almost no possessions, had abundance of time, was rarely busy, was almost always available for conversation, for help, for presence. Her simplicity created space that Priya's complexity consumed. One day Priya asked, "Do you ever want more? Better circumstances? More comfort?" Lakshmi thought about this. "I wanted more when I was younger. I thought happiness was ahead, in some future circumstance, in what I didn't yet have. So I was always reaching forward. Never here. Never satisfied. Then circumstances forced me to live with less, and I discovered something. I discovered that I had been carrying enormous burden without realizing it. The burden of all those things, the burden of maintenance and protection and comparison. When that burden lifted, I felt light for the first time. Free. Now I wouldn't trade this simplicity for any amount of comfort. Because this is comfort. Real comfort. The comfort of having no burden. The comfort of presence. The comfort of enough." Priya left that conversation changed. She went home to her large house, looked around at all her possessions, and for the first time, she saw them differently. Not as markers of success, as burden, as claims on her attention and time and energy, as barriers between her and the simple contentment Lakshmi had found. She began to let go. Slowly. Not all at once, but gradually releasing what she didn't need, what didn't serve, what was just weight. And as she did, she felt something lift, some tightness in her chest ease, some constant anxiety quiet. She never reached Lakshmi's level of simplicity. She didn't need to, but she found her own version of enough, her own experience of how less can create more. More space, more time, more peace, more of what actually matters. Years later, when Lakshmi died peacefully in her tiny house, the entire neighborhood mourned. They buried her in her one good sari. They found no possessions to distribute, nothing of material value. But they found something else, a legacy of contentment, of grace in simplicity, of peace in poverty, of joy in presence. These things couldn't be inherited like possessions, but they could be learned, could be remembered, could continue to teach long after she was gone. Her tiny house stood empty for a while. Then a young widow moved in. She brought almost nothing, just like Lakshmi. And neighbors noticed something, the same quality of peace, the same contentment, the same abundant time and generous presence. Lakshmi's legacy continued, not through things she left behind, through the example she embodied, through showing that contentment doesn't depend on circumstances, that peace is possible with very little, that a rich life isn't measured in possessions, that enough is available right here, right now, in this simple moment, this simple life, this simple joy of being alive. Lakshmi's story challenges our deepest assumptions about security and well-being. We believe, almost without question, that more resources make us more secure, that wealth provides protection, that accumulation builds a buffer between us and hardship. But Lakshmi experienced the opposite. Having less made her more secure, more flexible, more resilient, better able to adapt to changing circumstances, less vulnerable to loss because she had less to lose. This is counterintuitive. But think about it. The more you have, the more you have to protect, the more exposed you are to theft, damage, loss. The more complex your finances become, the more maintenance required, the more insurance needed, the more worry about keeping what you have. When you need very little, you're secure in almost any circumstance. You can adapt, adjust, make do. You're not locked into a particular lifestyle requiring constant high income. You're free to move, change, adjust, as circumstances require. Lakshmi lived this freedom. She needed so little that she could provide it for herself through simple work. She wasn't dependent on employers or markets or complex systems. She had basic skills and modest needs. That combination provided genuine security. Many of us are far less secure than we think. We have significant income, but also significant expenses. We have assets, but also mortgages and debt. We have insurance, but also vulnerability to economic changes, job loss, health problems. Our security is fragile because it depends on maintaining everything exactly as it is. Real security comes from resilience, from being able to handle change and adapt to new circumstances, from having skills that remain valuable regardless of economic conditions, from keeping your needs modest so you're not precariously dependent on everything working perfectly. Lakshmi also discovered something about possessions that most of us don't realize until we reduce them. Every possession is a relationship. It requires your attention, your care, your time, your energy. We think possessions serve us, but past un certain point, we serve them. Think about your own possessions. How much time do you spend managing them, cleaning them, organizing them, maintaining them, storing them? ensuring them, protecting them, thinking about them. If you tallied all that time and energy, you might be shocked. We're constantly serving our stuff while believing our stuff serves us. When you reduce your possessions to what you actually use and love, you reclaim all that time and energy. Suddenly, you have space for presence, for people, for experiences, for living your actual life instead of managing your stuff. Lakshmi had enormous time. Time to sit by the river. Time for slow meals. Time for neighbors. Time to be fully present because she wasn't constantly managing and maintaining. Her simplicity created abundance where others' complexity created scarcity. This is available to anyone. You don't need to reduce to Lakshmi's level, but you could experiment with less, could let go of things that don't serve you, could simplify your life and see what emerges, what space opens, what time returns, what peace arrives. The hardest part is the initial fear. We're so conditioned to believe that more is better, that having less feels like deprivation, like loss, like we're going backward. But many people who simplify discover the opposite. They feel lighter, freer, more peaceful, less burdened, and they wonder why they waited so long. Lakshmi's greatest gift to Priya wasn't advice. It was example. It was showing what's possible, that you can be happy with very little, that contentment doesn't require comfort, that a rich life doesn't require riches, that enough is far simpler than we imagine, that peace is available right here in basic, simple, présent existence. You don't need to move to a tiny house by the river, but you can bring Lakshmi's spirit to wherever you are, can question what you actually need, can release what doesn't serve, can discover how much freer you feel with less, how much richer presence becomes when it's not crowded out by possessions and management and constant complexity. What would it feel like to have enough, not more, just enough? To feel content with what you have, to stop reaching for the next thing, to arrive here, to be satisfied, to rest in simplicity, to discover that this is it, this simple life, this present moment. This is what you were seeking all along. It was never ahead in some future achievement. It was always here, waiting for you to notice, to arrive, to say yes to exactly what is. Breathe with that. Let it settle deep. Our journey continues through the night. In the mountains of Japan lived a woodcutter named Kenji. Every morning before dawn, he would walk into the forest. He carried only an axe, a rope, and a small bag with his lunch. He would cut dead wood, wood that had already fallen, or trees that had died standing. He never cut living trees. The forest gave him what it was already releasing. That was enough. He bundled the wood with his rope, carried it on his back down the mountain to the village, sold it to families for their cooking fires and heating. Simple work. Honest work. Work the forest made possible. His days had a rhythm set by nature. In summer, the forest was lush and the path long. In winter, the way was difficult, but the wood burned hot. In spring, new growth taught him where to walk carefully. In autumn, falling leaves showed him what the forest was letting go. Kenji lived in a small house at the forest's edge. Just 2 rooms, simple furnishings, a garden where he grew vegetables, a few chickens. Everything he needed came from the mountain, or his small garden, or his work. He made enough from his wood to cover what he couldn't produce himself. Rice, salt, oil, occasional new clothes. Simple necessities. He had no savings, no investments, no plans for wealth. Just enough for each day. And each day brought enough. Other men in the village worked in factories that were opening in the region. They earned more money than Kenji. They could buy more things. They told him he should leave the forest, get a real job, build a better future. But Kenji understood something they didn't. He had the forest. Every morning he walked among ancient trees. He breathed clean air. He worked at his own pace. He answered to no boss. He had no debt. No obligations beyond his simple life. No clock except the sun. No schedule except the seasons. I'm already rich. He would tell them, I have the forest. I have my health. I have simple work I can do until I'm very old. I have time to notice birds and mist and how light moves through cedar boughs. What would more money give me? A bigger house to clean? More possessions to worry about? An alarm clock and a boss? I'd lose everything that makes my life good. They thought he was simple, that he didn't understand what he was missing, that he lacked ambition. But Kenji had the clearest vision of anyone in the village. He knew what mattered to him, and it wasn't what money could buy. It was what the forest gave freely. Beauty, peace, rhythm, connection to something larger than human concerns. Work that felt like partnership with nature rather than extraction from it. One year, a lumber company wanted to buy the forest. They planned to clear-cut the entire mountainside, harvest everything, ship it all to distant cities for building materials. They offered money to everyone in the village. The town would prosper from the sale. There would be jobs during the logging operation. The mayor promoted it as progress, as opportunity, but Kenji spoke against it. At the village meeting, he stood and addressed the community. This forest has given us life for generations. It provides wood for our fires, clean water from its streams, air to breathe, beauty to nourish our spirits. It asks nothing in return except that we take only what we need, only what it freely gives. Now we're offered money to destroy it completely, to take everything at once. For what? So we can be briefly richer, so a lumber company in the city can profit. What will we have after? A bare mountainside, erosion, floods when the rains come, no forest to provide for our children. Is that progress? His words gave others pause, made them question. Not everyone, but enough. When the vote came, the village said no. They kept their forest. They kept their way of life. They chose enough over more. The lumber company went elsewhere. The village continued as before. Simple, sustainable, in relationship with the forest rather than exploiting it. Kenji continued his work. Every morning into the forest, every evening back to the village with bundled wood. Every day enough. Every season, its own rhythm. Every year the forest renewing itself, giving what could be taken without harm, receiving care in return. When Kenji was very old, his grandson asked him if he had lived a good life, if he had any regrets about staying simple, about not pursuing more. Kenji smiled. They were sitting outside his house. Evening light filtered through the trees. Birds were settling for the night. The forest breathed around them. Every morning for 50 years, Kenji said, I walked into that forest. I worked among those trees. I carried wood that kept families warm. I lived simply, yes, but simply isn't poorly. Simply is clearly. I knew what mattered. I lived it every day. I had enough. I had the forest. I had this. He gestured to the trees, the light, the evening song of birds. What more could anyone want? The grandson sat quietly. He lived in the city now. He worked in an office. He made good money. But something in his grandfather's words touched a longing he hadn't quite acknowledged. A longing for this. For enough. For simplicity. For connection to something real and enduring. For work that partnered with nature rather than conquered it. For a life that knew its own rhythm rather than being driven by external demands. When Kenji died, they buried him at the forest's edge. His grave was marked with a simple stone, but his real memorial was the forest itself, standing, alive, still giving, still providing, because he had taken only what was offered, because he had lived in partnership rather than exploitation, because he knew enough, because he chose simplicity over wealth, relationship over profit, presence over accumulation. The forest remembers. It stands as a living example of sustainable relationship, of taking only what's needed, of giving back, of recognizing enough, of choosing life over profit, of understanding that real wealth isn't what we extract, it's what we're part of, what we belong to, what holds us in its ancient rhythms, what we serve by living simply, what serves us when we live well. Kenji's story speaks to something our moment urgently needs. An alternative to extraction, to endless growth, to taking more than systems can regenerate, to treating nature as resource rather than relation. We live in an age of ecological crisis because we've forgotten enough. We take more than Earth can provide. We produce more waste than Earth can absorb. We consume as if there's no limit, as if more is always better, as if growth can continue forever. But Kenji shows another way, a way of working with nature rather than against it, of taking only what's offered, of recognizing limits as guides rather than barriers to overcome, of understanding that enough isn't deprivation, it's wisdom, it's sustainability. It's the only way to maintain relationship over time. He cut dead wood, not living trees. He took what the forest was releasing anyway. This required paying attention, required knowing the forest, required relationship. You can't extract sustainably from something you don't know. You can't take appropriately from something you're not in relationship with. This applies beyond forests, to all our relationships with natural systems, with soil, with oceans, with atmosphere, with the living world that supports us. We treat these as resources to extract from. We take as much as we can get away with. We barely notice when systems begin to collapse. But what if we approached it differently? What if we asked, what is being offered? What can be taken without harm? What would sustainable relationship look like? What is enough? These questions change everything. They shift from extraction to partnership, from exploitation to relationship, from maximum yield to appropriate harvest, from growth at any cost to flourishing within limits. Kenji lived this. His work was sustainable. The forest continued giving year after year, generation after generation, because he only took what it offered, because he honored its capacity, because he knew enough. This model scales to individuals, to communities, to nations, to humanity's relationship with Earth. We could choose enough, could recognize limits, could work within rather than against natural systems, could prioritize relationship over profit, sustainability over growth, flourishing within bounds over extraction unto collapse. But it requires what Kenji had: clarity about what matters, willingness to live simply, contentment with enough, recognition that real wealth isn't in accumulation but in sustainable relationship, that a good life isn't measured by how much we extract but by how well we belong, how responsibly we participate, how appropriately we take and give back. Kenji had the forest. That was his wealth, his prosperity, his inheritance, and his legacy, not because he owned it, because he belonged to it, because he lived in right relationship with it, because he honored what it could give without harming it, because he knew enough. What are you in relationship with that you're treating as mere resource? What are you extracting from that can't regenerate at the rate you're taking? What would enough look like? What would sustainable relationship require? How would your life change if you chose partnership over exploitation, sufficiency over maximum yield, belonging over ownership? These questions matter, not just philosophically, practically, for your well-being and the well-being of all the systems you participate in: family, community, workplace, environment, economy. All relationships require reciprocity, appropriate taking and giving, recognition of limits, commitment to sustainability. Kenji lived this wisdom simply: took wood the forest offered, sold it to warm families, made enough to live. Year after year, generation after generation, the forest still stands, still gives, still teaches anyone willing to learn that enough is enough, that simplicity is sufficient, that right relationship is real wealth. That partnership beats exploitation every time. That knowing your place in the larger web of life is the deepest prosperity, the truest security, the most complete success. Let that truth sink deep. Rest in it completely. Our journey through these simple stories continues. As the night deepens, as these stories settle into your awareness, perhaps you're noticing something, a thread running through all these lives, a common wisdom spoken in different voices. Shitu on his rock, Takeshi in his pottery, Eiko in her forest house, Bake in the kitchen, Chen with his 5 mu, Min in his boat, Wu with his 6 teas, Dorje in his cave, Ravi with his 5 customers, Lakshmi in her tiny room, Kenji in the forest. All of them found something we're constantly seeking. Found it not by pursuing more, but by recognizing enough. Not by adding, but by simplifying. Not by grasping, but by releasing. Not by achieving, but by being present. They teach us that contentment isn't a destination. It's not waiting in some future accomplishment or acquisition. It's available right now, in this moment, in this life, in this simple existence, exactly as it is. They teach us that simplicity isn't poverty. It's clarity. It's freedom from the burden of excess. It's the spaciousness that allows presence, that makes room for what actually matters. They teach us that enough is far simpler than we imagine, that most of what we think we need, we don't, that what we actually need to flourish is basic, and probably already here. They teach us that real wealth isn't in our bank accounts or our possessions or our achievements. It's in our time, our freedom, our relationships, our presence, our ability to be here completely, to receive this moment fully, to feel content with what is. These teachings aren't philosophical abstractions. They're practical wisdom, lived truth, embodied in actual lives that worked, that found peace, that discovered contentment, not in special circumstances, but in ordinary existence fully inhabited. You don't need to become a hermit or live in a cave or reduce to one bowl. You need to find your enough, your right scale, your appropriate simplicity, the version of these principles that fits your life, your responsibilities, your circumstances. But you can begin. You can question. You can examine what you actually need versus what you've been taught to want. You can experiment with less. You can simplify something. You can create space. You can notice what emerges when you do. You can ask yourself the questions these stories raise. What is my enough? What would simplicity look like for me? What am I maintaining that doesn't actually serve me? What pressure am I under that isn't actually mine? What would contentment feel like? What keeps me from feeling it now? These questions don't have simple answers, but sitting with them, living with them, letting them work on you, that's the practice. That's how wisdom gets embodied, how teaching becomes transformation, how stories shift from inspiration to integration. And underneath all these questions is one fundamental invitation. Be here. Be present. Stop looking past this moment towards some other moment that will finally be enough. This moment is enough. This life is enough. This simple existence, exactly as it is right now, is complete. Not because it's perfect, not because you have everything you want, but because it's what you have. It's your actual life, your real existence, the only moment you ever truly get. And when you're fully here for it, when you receive it completely, when you stop comparing it to some imagined better circumstance, it's enough. It's sufficient. It's, in its own way, perfect. That's the teaching of simplicity. That's the gift of contentment. Not that you get more, that you arrive fully for what you already have, that you become present, that you stop seeking and start being, that you discover that what you were looking for was here all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting patiently for you to notice, to arrive, to say yes, to rest, to be home, right here, right now. Just this, simply this, always this. Enough. Let yourself rest completely now. Your breath continues without effort. Your heart beats without trying. Everything necessary happens on its own. You can release, can let go, can simply be here, held by this moment, surrounded by silence, peaceful in the darkness. These stories have been gifts, small offerings, reminders of what's possible, of what's always been possible, of what's possible right now. You don't need to remember them all. Don't need to analyze or understand or figure anything out. Just let them settle. Let them work in ways deeper than thinking. Let them water seeds of simplicity that are already in you, already waiting, already knowing. Sleep comes when it comes. Peace is available now. Contentment isn't earned or achieved. It's recognized. It's already here. You're already enough. Your life is already complete, not because it's finished, because it's what it is. And what it is everything. Rest now, deeply, completely. Let everything else go. Let yourself be held by this moment, this breath, this simple existence, this enough, this always enough, this perfectly, completely, beautifully enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for allowing these simple stories to accompany you into rest. If these tales have served you, if they've brought you even a moment of peace or a glimpse of contentment, please consider sharing this channel with others who might need these reminders. A like or subscription helps others find their way here, to this quiet space where ancient wisdom meets modern rest. May you sleep well. May you wake renewed. May you carry something of this simplicity into your days. May you recognize you're enough. May you find contentment waiting right here, right where you are, right now. Rest well.